Hello there, Evie here, and welcome to my review of the Cooler Master Masterbox MB311L ARGB. Bit of a mouthful. So this is ARGB version, despite the lack of, well, light here. The computer's not actually on. I've replaced all the ARGB fans with the test fans, so we can do all the testing in a more thorough fashion. That'll be towards the end. Point on that, timestamps in the video description if you want to skip to any particular part of the video. So build, testing, power supply, what have you. If you want to skip to those bits, then please do. Do look out for the gripes I have with this. Yes, I do have some gripes, and it is to do with just cheapness and flimsiness generally overall, just, you know, saving $1 for the sake of, I don't know what the saying is. Anyway, yeah, I have those things. Make sure you look out for those. I'm going to say that just before I say there are Amazon affiliate links in the video description. If you like the case, again, consider the down points I have in here, then please consider purchasing through those, because it does give me a small kickback, which does help out the channel. So I hope I've balanced that out and made it at least reasonable. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for checking this one out, and I'll catch you in a second to kick off with the unboxing and through into the overview, build, testing, what have you. Cheers, guys. Like with nearly every other case, the unboxing experience is boring. So moving on, this is the MB311L. Let's take a look around and see what's what. Up front is a large amount of mesh, not Q300L mesh. This mesh isn't blocked by the chassis behind it. There's also a good amount of side intake area available, which is a promising outlook for the testing later. Up top is the front I/O, a couple of USB ports, the power and reset buttons, and headphone and mic jacks. As is pretty much standard with most cases these days, we've got a tempered glass side panel to one side and a steel side panel to the other. Nitpicking, I've noticed a few specs under the paint, so I don't think the spray room is as clean as it could be. The back end is to a certain degree painfully basic. It's the standard micro ATX rear layout, power supply unit to the base, motherboard and fan up top. When I say painfully basic, I'm only really referring to the Inwin 301 inspired breakaway panels, and you don't get replacements. Once they're gone, so make sure you know where your 16X slot is before you start hacking away. Unusually up top there's no filter, and that's because it's stored inside for safe transportation, which I approve of since they are prone to denting. At the base to the front is a pile of notches for the movable and removable drive cage inside, and the rear has the cheapest power supply unit filter sheet Cooler Master likely has in production right now. We do have rubber feet though, which is nice, but I find them to be more of a pain since I can't slide the case around on the desk, but that's just subjective. So that's the outside, how about the inside? Getting into this case is a little different from usual. I've not seen a glass retention mechanism quite like this. It's essentially a captive screw, but with a rubber grommet to hold the glass and the screw. I can't say it's any better or worse than any other mechanism outside of making sure you don't lose the screw. The steel side panel on the other hand has some basic captive screws. I've not had issues with these like in some others in the past, but your mileage may vary. These are pretty hit and miss. As seen earlier, hidden inside is the secret top filter. Now, normally that's where the commentary ends, but where most cases try to match the level of the filter to some degree with the top of the case, and it sometimes looks alright, Cooler Master has gone the other way and made the indentation noticeably deeper, which looks better in my opinion. The front panel takes some force to pry off, revealing two ARGB fans, and leaves behind the top I/O. Focusing on the fans, there are some clear compromises made here. So first to note, they are ARGB, and with that there are several versions of this case. You have the non-ARGB, the ARGB, and the ARGB with a controller, so make sure you know which one you're getting. Overall, radiator and or fan compatibility, while we're on the subject, looks like this. You've got room up front for a 280 or 240mm radiator up to 70mm in total depth with a fan based on the basement cutout. Space for a 120mm radiator up to the rear. Up top you can throw in a 120 or 240mm radiator, but no deeper than 50mm tall to not clash with the motherboard, and to the base there's no fan or radiator support, but a couple of spaces for 2.5-inch drives, which we'll touch on in a second. There are a few cable management holes in the usual places, and around the back we've got another couple 2.5-inch drive spaces in the center. Drive cage to the front is a little unusual. You can slot it into various positions, which is nice and allows up to a 140mm power supply unit at its furthest back position, and I'd only recommend up to a 160mm power supply unit in its furthest forward position. So what's weird about it then? Well, okay, I'm not going to try and come at this in a weird way, but it just seems so strange they've gone about this in this particular way. And on the specification, it's not like they're being misleading as per se, but if you read the specification, you kind of get the true picture. If you look at the case, you get a completely different story. So you've got these grommets here. I'll show you different angles now. You can use these to slot onto the top pieces here to be able to install a 3.5-inch drive on the top. And you've also got the ability to, give you a second there. So if you install full, it'll stabilize it and you put some screws in, it's fine. You can also install a couple of 3.5-inch drives in there with use of these side brackets that pinch into the side of the drives. That's great. Apart from these grommets that you plug into these points here aren't actually for this, even though they do work in that sense. They're actually for the 2.5-inch drives on the side, on the back of the motherboard tray and inside. They only provide 8. So you have an option of doing two 2.5-inch drives, which the specification does say you can do. So 2 on the back of the motherboard tray, or you can do 2 to the base of the front compartment, which is not a problem. But you can only do one or the other, not both at the same time, because they only provided you 8 grommets for some reason. You could, in theory, put 3 3.5-inch drives into this drive cage, and it would fit under, it'd be great. But they only provide 8, so that means you can only have 1 2.5-inch drives and 3 3.5-inch drives, which is weird. If they'd given you, this is the funny bit, if they'd given you not 8, but they'd given you 2 sets for 2 2.5-inch drives, another 2 sets for another 2 2.5-inch drives, and 1 set for 1 3-inch drive, so that's 4, 8, we've got 16, and then we've got, that's going up to 20. If they give you 20 of these, you could pack this thing full of 4 2.5-inch drives and 3 3.5-inch drives, giving you so many options. But they went really stingy with these little grommets, which just blows my mind. Why go down that road? Anyway, a simple thing. They provided the ability to do it. They would have to provide more of these miniature screws, which I kind of think are quite interesting, and they work in a very, very unique way. I've not seen this before. You apply these to the underside of your 2.5-inch drive, and then you apply these grommets to your 2.5-inch drive slots, and then out of just friction, these screws go into the grommets and hold it in place in a light manner. It's not heavy duty, but it does enough of a job, I think, to be a good use, have good function. Anyway, I'm going to stop with that. It's just strange. All they had to do was provide more grommets. Even another set or 2 sets more, I'd be satisfied. But I'm kind of feeling like they've got options they're not ticking, which is weird for the sake of the cost of grommets, but there we go. And just want to clarify, on the website it says 2.5-inch / 3.5-inch combo. The only thing I can think that combo refers to is when you have a drive sled, which you can put a 2.5-inch or 3.5-inch drive into, but these aren't sleds, they're just things that stick onto the side of a 3.5-inch drive and are compatible with the drive cage. It's not like a sled where you've got holes in the bottom and you put a 2.5-inch drive into it, and that's the combo. There's no combination between these. It just doesn't work that way. So yeah, I have to say that I think somebody in the marketing team has done something a bit wrong there, and they didn't ask the right question. You can only put 2 2.5-inch drives to the back of the motherboard tray, or 2 2.5-inch drives inside the main compartment at the base, or 2 3.5-inch drives in here. All that combination thing I was saying with the, where it gets really messy, but there is no combo. That you can't put 4 2.5-inch drives into this. It doesn't work. They don't supply enough grommets for you. So there we go. So to clarify the point, the grommet thing is good. They just missed an opportunity for the sake of a few cents. Something I've done differently in this build to any other build I've done so far is to sort out the cable management before installing the motherboard. I just randomly did it for the sake. And you know what? It's got to be one of the easiest ways to build a system in a tidy fashion, in my opinion. Within 25 minutes, which included some faffing around looking for an ARGB controller, thanks to SilverStone, by the way, for sending out an ARGB AIO previously, I had pretty much sorted all the cables out. I've not hooked up the 3.5-inch drives with power and data since I don't actually use them, and I've placed the grid to control the fans on top of the drive cage, which worked out nicely. Overall, there's enough room for a decent cable management job, but any less room than this and there might be some problems. Unfortunately, not all went as well for the motherboard installation. I spent about 15 minutes trying to get the board in, and this should be a few minute job, and it turns out that the central motherboard post was misaligned very slightly, so it was forcing the hole to not engage with its post. The only thing that fixed the problem was to put the middle post in the lower position and put the second post in the top position. So with the motherboard finally in place with a 155mm tall Scythe Mugen 5, max cooler height being 166mm, it's finally time to deal with the least impressive part of this case, the PCI Express slot covers. Now I don't normally record audio since most of a PC build isn't interesting to listen to, but I thought I'd capture the Cooler Master quality sound of snapping bits of metal off the case. Now, it took a good few minutes of faffing about to get these two panels to break away. Again, this should be a 10-second job, and you might have spotted why already. The motherboard is positioned a little further out than the end panel, which is normal, and the panel is fixed to the inside of the case, which I guess could be normal too. So the only really easy way to bend the panel is inwards, in which case you find it hitting the edge of the motherboard. It's not a damaging thing, it's just annoying. Now, Cooler Master knows as much, which is why their manual guide shows you to remove these first before installing a system. Really, I should know now in advance of installing a motherboard into the case what panels I'm going to need to break now and for any hardware in the future to avoid an awkward snap off cover panel thing or rebuilding half the system. In most cases around this price point you get a proper PCI Express slot cover panel with screws for all the slots, but it looks like the ARGB costs so much that corners needed to be cut elsewhere, so you end up with a case with loads of potential, like a cheap new car with a load of missing option buttons on the dash. Now before anyone says it, I'm going to say it first, yes that is nitpicking, but the reason I'm saying it is just, isn't it just annoying when you get instructions and for the sake of liability, the manufacturer puts in the most convoluted ways of doing something just so there's no liability issue. So, if you followed Cooler Master's guidance, you'd install everything down to and including the motherboard, snap another panel off, or snap the panels off you want to upgrade to a graphics card or from a graphics card to another, or add another card in of any kind, and then rebuild your system up to whatever you want. Now, that's just annoying, nobody's going to do it, but they put the instructions in that's convoluted, so they're free of any liability, and that's fair enough, but it is annoying. Now, what I'm saying is that yes, if you left your system in there and you snapped the inside panel off, there is a possibility accidents happen, hence so you have man-safe systems on roofs so people maintaining buildings and stuff don't fall off them. There is a potential that if you snapped off a panel inside with your system inside, you could scratch your motherboard, what have you, the finish could come off, you could short some traces together and it would be a problem. What I am saying is that instead of having all this convoluted way of snapping things inwards and then having to go around issues to get away from that, why not just have them snap outwards? That's all I'm saying. Anyway, 1 minute disclaimer to stop one person from complaining. Let's move on. With the graphics card installed, it's time for some testing. There are a few different configurations and setups we're trying out to understand how this thing really works, and since the testing method is new, we'll be comparing the case results with the test bench results. Before we get into that, note that the CPU cooler and graphics cards fans will be spinning at the same speed throughout all the testing, and are spinning at the same speed as they were on the test bench. I'll be getting into the technicals about that in another video, but it's a change in the case fans that will be varying the performance of the system. The first setup we'll be testing is the stock max setup. This relies on the maximum performance of the case fans. In other words, the stock fans from the case will be running at full speed. This will give us the best test system performance out of the box. The second setup is the optimal acoustic setup. This one sees the stock fans replaced with a pile of EVGA Vardar F4 120ER fans that can spin up to 2200 RPM. It's at this point I'd like to go on a tangent and say, Cooler Master, bugger off with the external chassis fan placement. It's one of the least user-friendly things to work with post-build if you want to replace fans, but I guess it means the light from your ARGB fans aren't impeded by the chassis, but man, what a ball ache to remove. And it's not like you can install one of these fans any lower in front of the drive cage externally unless you really hate yourself and want to unbuild most of the system when changing fans. Anyway, these fans will be limited to a speed which reaches the acoustic target of 36.5 dBA at 40 centimeters at a 45-degree angle from the front of the case. This allows us to work out what the performance difference is when the noise output from all of the systems being tested is normalized. And finally, the last setup is the Acoustic Max setup. This is a blend of the last two setups, so we'll be using the Vardar fans from the Optimal Acoustic setup, and they'll be running at full speed like the stock Max setup. This should provide, within reason, the best airflow this case can offer without modification. Starting with a stock Max and Priority 5 10-minute torture test, compared to the same system on a test bench, the MB311L is really not doing too badly. Only about 7 degrees hotter on the GPU and about 4 degrees on the CPU. And although the fans are at full speed, they're only running at just over 1200 RPM, so they're not making that much more noise than the test bench's CPU and GPU fans without case fans, which are spinning at the same speed on both setups. Same situation for the Firestrike 10-minute combined loop test. A little cooler on the CPU here due to the lower load, so it's a positive result all round for the stock fans. Again, really not much louder than the same setup on the test bench, only without the case fans. Taking a look at the Optimal Acoustic setup results, changing the stock fans out for 5 2200 RPM fans, only they're limited to about 30% speed or 640 RPM to hit the 36.5 dBA acoustic target at 40 centimeters, we get the following results. Keeping in mind the stock fans at full speed were hitting roughly 37.8 dBA, the MB311L in this configuration hitting the quieter 36.5 dBA target isn't losing a lot of thermal performance, about 3.5 degrees hotter on the GPU and about 1 degree hotter on the CPU. Same setup, but back to Firestrike, we're looking at an 8-degree increase in GPU thermals compared to the stock, which again was a little louder, but the CPU is only about 1 degree hotter. Rounding off the thermal testing, we're ramping all the Vardar fans up to full speed, which threw the sound level above 50 dBA, or decibels with an A weighting, which was extremely noisy. This is only to find out how well the case could cool the system with all guns blazing. Compared to the test bench, which is a lot quieter, the MB311L did manage to cool the CPU better. However, the GPU didn't receive the same treatment, being around 4 degrees hotter. This isn't surprising considering the graphics card is set up perpendicularly to the direction of airflow, whereas the CPU cooler is perfectly aligned to take advantage of the 3 front fans. And I completely forgot to talk about the Firestrike combined test, which was basically the same as the Priority 5 test, lower on the CPUs and a little hotter on the GPU. For the sake of completion, I'll flash these slides up quickly. These will mean a lot more going into the future after we've had a handful more cases through the new testing process, but the slide is basically breaking down the cost in a few regions at the time of recording. The next slide is a little more painful to view, but it's a breakdown of the CPU and GPU price versus performance from the Firestrike Optimal Acoustic run in the various regions. Again, this will mean more once we've populated the graphs a little more, but you can get a good idea of how well the CPU or GPU did based on the cost in each region. And if the last slide was too much to take in, here's the same but isolating the GPU price versus performance, and here's the isolated CPU price versus performance, and that's the lot. In conclusion, this is a good case, and if you can get past the bugbears I have, such as the flimsy power supply unit, this is what happens when you do too many takes. The flimsy power supply unit filter, not just the power supply unit is fine. Thank you, SilverStone. They sent that over. The filter is the flimsy thing. At the bottom, which the only way you could make that cheaper is just to not have one. A real hallmark of a super cheap case is if you come across that, and the PCI Express slot covers to the rear being breakaway, and to not even include spares in the parts bag or tray or box. Yeah, it's just, as far as I'm concerned, really no good. If they included a couple of spares you could swap in if you wanted to cover up the gaps that maybe you'd broken away, or maybe accidentally broken away because you didn't quite understand, or maybe changed the motherboard or something and the slot wasn't where it was before, something like that, a couple of spares would have completely cleaned that up for me. I understand it's a way to save money so you can include ARGB into the case, and that's good for some people. And again, another cost-saving measure is it's a 3-pin fan, not a 4-pin fan, so you lose that better low-end control. But to be fair, it's not a very fast fan to begin with, and they're relatively quiet. So running at full speed, this was really not that much louder. It was a chunk louder, but not that much louder than my acoustic test, which is really designed to be pretty low as I could really comfortably go to make sure that most of the products I get in to test will be able to at least meet that mark. Just touching on the grommet situation I went on for a long period of time in the video, if this case seems to be one that could be a long-term case, a really big build case for quite a lot of people. The amount of drives you could throw into this, 3.5 inches, 4 2.5-inch drives, it just seems something you could fill up, and you've got loads of capacity for growth into the future. And yeah, you've got plenty of space up for a radiator, a predetermined space for it. You can see the ventilation slot to the rear. It's a significant gap. You've got at least 50 millimeters. I say at least, depending on your motherboard and where your heat sinks are, then you could have a little bit more than that, but 50 mil, you've got a good chunk of space there to throw in a radiator and fan. Again, at the front, you can throw in more there. And while I'm covering the radiator fan situation thing, I said in the video, and I said in previous videos, that throwing in case fans outside of the chassis, my main issue with that is that for a start, it makes it really awkward to install the fans and remove them. If you put a CPU cooler in there, if you put anything in here and you've got, like, not unless you've got like a stubby screwdriver, it's going to make it awkward to access those fans to change them in the future. It also, in a lot of cases, I found doing exhausting on the Node 804 case with the fans right up against the filters, it creates an awful lot of noise. Way more noise, especially when the fans spin up. Not so much when they're at slower speeds. When the fans spin up, a lot of noise gets created. There's enough of a gap in this case for them to exist outside the chassis and not have that noise issue, but in a lot of different cases, that can be a problem. Depending on filter type as well, because I know the Node 804 had a foam filter and not just a metal perforated filter at the front, so there's that. But anyway, so I would definitely endorse somebody buying this case. I think it's reasonably good, as long as you can get past the little bugbears there, the sort of cheap, sort of cut around corner stuff. But I will say that if you're going for the non-ARGB version, just do a recalculation in your head to work out, is the removal of ARGB from there enough for the price to come down, or is the price low enough for the removal of the ARGB to be taken into account, and also factor in the flimsiness that seems to be compensated for getting the ARGB there in the first place still exists in the non-ARGB version. So you're still getting super cheap PCI Express slot covers, and you're getting a super cheap filter at the bottom. It's just something for you to work out in your head. Does that work for you? If so, yeah, I think everything else apart from that is good, and I would recommend getting it. So there we go. I'm going to leave it at that because I do drone on, and it's probably already been like an 8-minute outro or something, or conclusion. So thank you so much for checking this video out. If you did like it, please subscribe, like the video, and if you want to support the channel, if you've been watching it for a while and you want to, push it forward with me, then you can always subscribe to Patreon, but that's up to you. There's also Amazon affiliate links in the video description, which I always forget to add because there's too many things to keep track of on these things. So thanks so much, guys. Catch you in the next one. Bye-bye.